Hi, my name is Chelsea, and I'm here to talk about my first and second ayahuasca experiences. If you've watched any of my other videos, then you've probably heard me talk about how the very first time I did ayahuasca, it didn't take. I didn't have a breakthrough experience. It was pretty disappointing, and I realize now in hindsight that I made a lot of mistakes going into it. So I definitely want to briefly mention those before I get into what the first real experience with ayahuasca was like. Also, if you haven't watched any of my other videos, I do feel like I should mention that I have a history of severe depression, anxiety, PTSD. I was on a variety of psychiatric drugs for most of my life since I was about 11 or 12 years old. Some of my earliest memories were of having panic attacks, anxiety attacks, and just being suicidally depressed, even as a really young child. So my whole purpose in doing ayahuasca was to hopefully get myself off all of those pharmaceutical drugs that I just had so many side effects from and that I didn't feel were actually helping my quality of life. Like, I had a lot of great things going on in my life, but it still didn't feel like it was enough. And I thought, okay, there's something bigger going on here. And that was the reason why I had initially wanted to try ayahuasca. So the very first time I found my journal from the time when I had been going through my first few ceremonies, and it's so unbelievable to read them now. It was really emotional for me because I was such a completely different person back then. I mean, this was 2016. It was only 4 years ago, and yet I feel like this might as well have been something from, when I was a kid, because I did not know what was going on. It's kind of cringy, but it's also kind of cute, like how dumb I was and like naive about certain things. Um, so yeah, it's funny. Like my first journal entry right before the first time I went to do ayahuasca. It was Friday, June 24th, 2016 at 5:14 p.m. and I said only 45 minutes before my first ayahuasca ceremony. I'm a little nervous, but mostly ready for it to start already. Here's a list of all of the things that I want to accomplish during this ceremony. And then I list out every single thing that I would like ayahuasca to show me during my first ceremony. And I'm not going to go into it specifically here, but I am going to say I went into incredible detail. I was saying, first, I want you to show me this. And then after you're done showing me that, I want you to show me this. And next, we'll go here. And then cap it all off with, I would love to feel this. It was like I was like planning a vacation or something. I am so embarrassed because I truly see now that I was viewing ayahuasca as this magic pill that I was going to take, and it was going to magically fulfill all of my needs and desires that I wanted for myself, which is not what ayahuasca is. Ayahuasca is this infinite intelligence. It is a being. It is a personality. It is sentient, and it is wiser than anyone or anything, and far beyond anything that I was. I knew nothing, and here I am telling this infinite being, how about you take me here and do this and then spiff me up like it's just, I cringe now because I have this deep what I feel like is a relationship with ayahuasca where I really understand what it is, and I just go, oh, what was I doing? I had no idea what I was doing. So I definitely don't recommend going in with a list of demands that you want to experience, because that's not going to get you very far. It is good to have general goals about what you would like to work on, but do not go into, I want you to do this and this and this and this. That is not up to you to decide at all. So it's just safer to go in with some sort of general ideas of things that you want to work on. Like for me, it would have been, rewiring my brain so I could get off antidepressants. The first dose that I took, the facilitators there, they knew that I had not had an experience the very first time that I had taken it before. And so they prepped me by having me take a massive dose. I believe I took 3 ounces, which for this concentration is massive. To give you some idea, like now when I go, I normally take like under 1 ounce or around 1 ounce. So 3 ounces is kind of like, well, like massive. Even with that massive dose, I did not have an experience. After an hour, nothing was happening. And I was really battling that fear of nothing happening. But I was given the opportunity to take another dose. And when I took that, that was when, within about 15 or 20 minutes, I started to feel things happening that were just really bizarre. So I go into the specifics. The very first thing that I felt was a cold laser-like energy that started from this side of my body, and it was like a line that went down fully, like all the way down me. I felt like I was in a scanner. I was being scanned, and it was like a cold laser moving from this side all the way over to this side, and I felt it like on my skin. I felt really cold all of a sudden, and this was during the summer, so it was really hot out, from here to here, and then from the top to bottom. And I remember thinking, and at this point I still had all of my mental faculties. I was not in an altered state. I was just aware of this sensation, this cold sensation that was moving in a very specific way. And I thought, it's scanning me. I'm being scanned. And then it was like silence. There was nothing going on. And I thought, what is happening? Is it like figuring out who I am? If I had to guess at the time, and even now, my understanding is that I think it was scanning me. It was like going through my history, like every past life, every traumatic thing that had ever happened to me. It was like fully scanning my energy field. And then I just waited, and I started to feel a sensation moving in through the top of my head, and I started to move my head. And I realized, okay, wait, that's not me moving my head. And so I would try to stop it, but then it would move on its own. And then my neck and my shoulders started to move. And I was like, this is not me. And it's like, it reminds me of, if you've ever had a computer problem and you need IT to like remote in, and they're trying to like fix your computer, remotely from wherever they are, and they're moving the mouse and they're bringing up programs, and you could also move the mouse too, but like really they're in charge. You should just let them be in charge. It was exactly that. It was like there were two spirits that had entered this body, and we were kind of struggling for control. Or at least I was like, why are we moving like this? My body doesn't move like this. And it also was this feeling of like, I feel like ayahuasca is trying me on like a coat. Like it was trying me on and go like, how does this body move? Like, what is this all about? And that was an amazing, like, just intro into ayahuasca. It is like surrender. And I kept saying that to myself, surrender. Just, I know this is scary for something else to come into your body, but you need to surrender to this experience and just let go. From there, I started immediately going into death over and over. That does seem to be kind of a rite of passage initially, is to get over that fear of death and dying. It's like, that's so much of what this medicine is about. And so there were a couple deaths right away that I remember feeling like they were incredibly familiar. And I don't know how else to describe that, like, other than that, when they were happening to me, I went, oh, I've been here before. I know what this life is. It wasn't a question of like, where am I and who am I and what is this and anything. It was like, no. And I believe now that they were actually past life deaths. That's just my guess, and just based on how comfortable I felt in the scenarios, like that's what I really think. One of the other things about that I think is strange is that like I'd always had some really specific fears about dying. I was obsessed with death when I was a kid. Like it was all I thought about, and I would stay up all night just fearing death and having really specific types of deaths that I was afraid to experience as a child. I would have reoccurring nightmares about them. Specifically, one was about being impaled through my stomach. And the thoughts and memories that I would have around that were about, okay, I've been impaled through my stomach, and now I'm still aware and conscious that I'm alive, but that I'm going to die, and that as soon as this is removed, I will die, and that even if this stays in me, I'm slowly going to bleed out, and there is nothing that I can do. When I would talk to my parents about that, they would be like, that's the most insane, bizarro fear to have. That's so unlikely that that's ever going to happen to you. And yet when I experienced it in ayahuasca, I remember going, no, this happened to me. I felt this, I remember all of this when it happened. And I remember that the worst part was knowing that I was about to die. Oh, it had happened, and now I'm just in that limbo of just gotta wait to die. And the same kind of thing happened with drowning. I was so afraid of drowning when I was a kid, and I didn't know why. I loved the water, but I just had these fears of drowning, and I had a death during ayahuasca where I somehow jumped into the water, and I had just been sucked down too far, and I kept getting further and further, and I was disoriented. I could see the light above the water, and I just was going, oh no, got disoriented. I didn't know which way, in which direction to swim. The light was scattered across the body of water that I was in, and so I could sense that I wasn't going to be able to get there in time, that I was going to drown. And it was that period of time of scrambling and going, what's what and where do I go, that was the most difficult part of the death. And I re-experienced that too. And as I did, it was these memories of, I didn't have these very specific fears for no reason. It was because I lived them before. Prior to this, you would have never heard the words past life come out of my mouth. I truly never gave a second thought to that. I think I was open to the idea of reincarnation, but it's different when you feel it and you go, no, I've been here. It's the same thing of in this life, you know when you've been somewhere, you know when you've met someone, you know there's a full body knowing when you experience certain things, and that was what was happening. So ayahuasca took me through truly hundreds of deaths, and I don't know if all of those were past lives, but I have detailed memories of many of them, and occasionally something will happen to me just in my everyday life that will trigger a memory, and I'll go, oh, I remember dying that way. I remember dying as a baby. I remember dying as a teenager. I remember dying as an old person. I remember being shot. I remember being stabbed. I remember being falling down a hill and just dying alone, in a ravine. I have really specific memories from all of these. And when ayahuasca took me through them all again, it felt like it unlocked something inside of me. And so it kept going on over and over, and it was really exhausting. It didn't feel fun to me. It was horrifying. The first few deaths, it was I still was very attached to the idea of, oh no, death means the end of everything. And then after each one, it was no, there's no gap in my consciousness. My consciousness is one straight continuous line that never ends, even when whatever body I'm in dies. It never ends. And as soon as that death ends, I continue on in somewhere else. And it's not scary, and it actually isn't painful. I really, as the many deaths kept going on, I started getting into the intricacies of what death was like and what the actual process was. And it felt so familiar. It felt no, I've done this so many times. This isn't an unnatural thing. I've died so many times, and when I do die again, I'm going to immediately go back to those times, all of those other times that I did die, and I'm going to remember, I'm going to fall into it just like I always have. So I went through hundreds of deaths, and at the end of it, I really came through with a lot of information about why I had always been so terrified of death. And it really mostly had to do with all of the fear that I was experiencing. That the worst part of death was not the actual dying part. It wasn't the pain. It was all of the fear that led up to it. And that fear was worse than death. That was the only thing that was worse than death. And that my obsession over death and my actual longing for it, my kind of suicidal ideation, didn't have to do with me actually wanting to die. It was me wanting to make the fear stop. I had let fear take over my entire life, and that had became the great enemy, but I didn't realize it for what it was. I thought, I didn't know what it was. I thought that it was something that was a part of me. I thought that I was the fear and the fear was me, and that there was something wrong with me, but really that's not what it was. I started to see fear for what it was. This program that I had running unknowingly that had just gone wild within my body. And another thing I want to touch on is that ayahuasca did momentarily show me what it would be like if I did commit suicide, what that experience would be like. It said, if you, in a very frustrated state of not wanting to do this anymore, committed suicide, you would instantly, your consciousness would not ever stop. Your consciousness would then go to a room in which you are stuck with all of the problems that you are trying to escape in this lifetime, except you wouldn't have the physicality to be able to move the problems or to navigate the problems. So you would just be stuck in this room with your problems, and you wouldn't be able to do anything about it until you then went into another life and then went through the same thing all over again, because the lessons that you have to learn in physicality. They're not things that you can go learn about up in the ether without a body. So if you don't learn it in this lifetime, you're going to have to learn it again. And in that way, suicide is not a way out. It is simply just going like, oh, I can't handle it, so you're going to have to go through it again. It doesn't erase any of the problems at all. In fact, it may potentially make them significantly worse, or your experience of them. You're still going to have to experience them. There's no just way out of it. And I thought that was huge. In that moment, that fully cured me of any kind of suicidal ideation. And I truly, for as much as I thought about it, like my entire life, and had, really strongly considered it, it was after that, not only did ayahuasca rewire my brain, but I have never once for a moment considered committing suicide, which is major to me. That's huge. And it's just because I have seen what it looks like, especially for me. And I would just go, I would never want to go into that room with all of my problems that I would just be suffocated by. So the next thing that it took me to was, it showed me this tangled web of branches, and it told me these are your neural pathways. And some of the thicker trunks of the branches, it was saying these are the ones that are leading to hopelessness, despair, fear. You are fully wired to go into these dark places, and these are the pathways that are sending you there time and time again. And then all of a sudden, a sword comes through and just starts cutting through them. And now the interesting thing about that is, as that sword was cutting through them, I could hear in my ear, if you've ever had your ears pierced and you hear the needle slicing through, you can hear that because it's so close to your ear. I felt and heard the slicing of the neural pathways like that. It was like tissue being sliced in my ears as that was going on. And I didn't feel any pain, but I did feel it was almost like a clip, like when you hear your hair getting cut, like that slice of a scissor. That's exactly what it sounded like. The next thing then, I felt like there were lights all over my head. Like it felt like they were like Christmas lights that had just been wrapped around my head. And I saw and felt heat, and they were like getting smaller and brighter and hotter and like blinking. And and that just went on for a while, and there was no explanation. Like I didn't know what was going on. I just sat there for that. And then all of a sudden, what dropped down, I was just taken to a totally like blank canvas area, and out of the pure nothing blackness, this like thing just started spiraling around down, and it dropped down into the nothingness, and it just started unfolding, and it was this entire city. Now, it didn't look like a city like anything here. It looked like a simulation, almost like a computer simulation, and it was unfolding itself, and then skyscraper buildings were just appearing. It was like expanding rapidly. And in the skyscraper buildings, I then zoomed in and was able to see that every floor on every building, as I looked through the windows, held a traumatic memory from my childhood. So as I looked in through the windows, I saw some of the worst things that had ever happened to me. And these were all of the things that were major PTSD moments for me, just really traumatic things that I would often go back to over and over in my head. And then in some of the smaller buildings were smaller episodes, like not quite the most devastating incidences. It was just like everything that had given me some sort of emotional response. So it was like somebody calling me a name, or somebody, something that wasn't like an actual threat to my life. Like the tall skyscrapers, those were like the big near-death, like really, really most devastating possible things. And I saw all of it, and I was just amazed. I was like, oh wow, you've built a city of all of my trauma. And yeah, I can't remember exactly what they said, but it was something like, this is a map of your pain or something. And that was the only explanation. And I just watched, and then all of a sudden the biggest skyscrapers started to implode and collapse. And as they were imploding, like the dust was just evaporating into air and to nothingness. And then the city, like once everything, all of like the major things had exploded and were gone, then the whole city just started folding up on it in itself, and then it spiraled back up into the sky. And there was no explanation, and I sat there and I waited, and then I saw like a pink-white wave tsunami type thing coming, and it was incredibly high. And I assumed there was something about the pinkness of it, the color, I think, that made me think, oh, this is going to be good. And it was this like wave of unconditional love, the deepest, most profound, overwhelming love that I've ever felt in my life. And I felt like it was the greatest gift I've ever been given, the greatest feeling I've ever had. And I was filled with so much love for myself that I'd never felt. I've always really struggled with self-love and even any kind of self-acceptance. It used to be so much worse. I've come so far, but at that time, it was the first even taste that I'd ever had of loving myself. And I felt in love with myself. I was like, you are this incredible caretaker, and yeah, no doctors have ever been able to help you with anything, but that's never stopped you from trying, and it's never stopped you from reading all of these books about health and trying to every different, supplement and diet and everything just to try to make yourself better. And that's incredible. Like, you're this incredible caretaker for yourself, and most people just trash their bodies and like, look at you, you're so great. And I was like holding myself, I was hugging myself, just feeling like so much love for the I started to see my life and the things that had happened to me very differently. I stopped seeing myself as a victim, and I started being grateful for even the worst things that had happened. And I never thought that I could get to that point. It was showing me in this way, with this like beautiful like flood of love that I am loved unconditionally always, that I'm never alone, that I am always protected, and it was showing me that even these things that were so traumatic for me and so difficult for me to get through were actually gifts, and that as painful as they were, that if I could get through them and still be at like peace and find any kind of peace, that I could then help others with the same issue. And I guess it was just, I started to see my life differently. I started to see my purpose differently. And I remember in that moment just having that brand new perspective that I'd never had before, and just thinking, I am walking into my life with my eyes open for the very first time. I am seeing everything completely different. than I ever have, and it's going to change everything. There's no way that I'll ever be able to see myself or my past or anyone in my life the same way again. And that was true. I mean, I had really kind of difficult relationships with my parents, both in their own separate ways. I've talked a lot about, issues with my mom, but in that moment, I felt such profound love for her because I also saw everything that she had been through in her life. Her life was horrific. Her childhood was a nightmare compared to mine. When I think about, some of the worst things that she did to me as a child, they're bad, and anyone would agree that they're bad. But when you compare them with the things that my mom went through as a child, they're nothing. It's incredible that she's even alive. And I had just this overwhelming compassion for her, and I felt like I began to see everything, all of my experiences with her through this entirely different lens. I felt like, I had come into this life with a distorted pair of glasses on, and so I never really fully saw my reality for what it truly was until I did ayahuasca, and then it put like the correct lenses on, and I suddenly saw like my mother is not this person that I am a victim to who is just causing me pain for no reason. It is because she has an immense amount of pain that she doesn't even begin to know how to handle. And it was so just this perspective, this new perspective, these new like glasses that I had put on, in which I was able to see my reality for what it truly was just it was the most healing thing that I have ever experienced. And I've had so many more experiences with ayahuasca that have been truly incredible, and I'm definitely going to talk more about them, but this first one, it really was the most beautiful thing, and it's so meaningful, and I'm so grateful. I could cry. I tear up just thinking about my gratitude for this medicine and my path with it, my journey with it, everything that I've been through. It has been a rocky ride, but I would not change any of it, and it was all 100% worth it to be where I'm at now, and to have the understanding that I have now, and the relationship that I have with myself, the relationship that I have with my parents, and the relationship that I have to my life and this universe. It's entirely different, and it could not have been this way without ayahuasca. So super grateful, and yeah, if you enjoyed this, please let me know. If you want to hear more about ayahuasca, let me know. Whatever, anything. I really appreciate any kind of feedback. So let me know what you think, and I'll be back soon with another video.